What's up everyone? Today we're going to do a video on gauge reliability or potentially lack thereof on your R32 Skyline GTR. This will actually be a two-parter, so stay tuned for the second half because it's going to be good. Holy crap, is that a physical, tangible part and not just a photo on the internet? Yeah, I know, we take the easy way out a lot because, well, frankly, I personally don't feel like rummaging through the garage for a part we may not have. And it's 110 degrees out there, so I don't feel like sweating. I know people, for whatever reason, think that we're gods among men because we sell Skylines for a living, but in reality, we're just normal, sweaty dudes like everyone else. So now that you think we're savages with lame excuses, let's go ahead and continue the video. I'm making a special exception for you guys and found this part just for you. Starting with the bottom right, we have our coolant temperature gauge. This is actually a very reliable gauge within the Skyline, so this is something we've never had to change out. That being said, this is a Skyline, so a lot of times people upgrade to an aftermarket gauge just for a little bit more, well, I guess coolness and potentially reliability. But again, we've never had to swap one of these, so this has actually been a really good gauge. Moving above that, we have the oil pressure gauge. Now, if you watched our last video about the oil pump, you'll know that this is a very important gauge because you never want to see this one at zero. Granted, it's okay for this one because it's disconnected. But if you see it zero while your car is running, it might spook you a little bit and think that your engine's about to explode, which it could potentially. But that being said, this gauge isn't the most accurate or reliable, so a lot of times this is one where people will actually upgrade for a good reason to an aftermarket unit to get a little bit more reliability. Moving to our left, we have the tachometer. Now, as you can see, 8,000 is about your red line, and you want to make sure not to bounce off that, as mentioned in the previous video. But the Tax actually is somewhat reliable gauge, but we've actually seen quite a few fail at the same time. What will oftentimes happen is it won't read accurately what your revs are, or sometimes will just bounce around the cluster and not really give you anything definitive at all. Again, a lot of times people will swap to an aftermarket unit to get a little bit more clarity on what the revs are and a little bit more accuracy. I can already hear the questions about this one, the Speedo. Has Montu ever swapped these over to get more sweet mileage in our cars? No, don't worry. We keep it honest and we're not Danny DeVitoing the mileage back with a drill or anything. And we don't swap our dash clusters because, well, liability. That being said, this is actually a very reliable gauge. The part that's actually prone to failing is the part that goes behind it, which is a long cable that runs from the gauge to the transmission to give it its exact speed. That part is prone to failure, the gauge actually is not, but people oftentimes in Japan do swap these so they can get something a little bit higher than 180 kilometers an hour because, well, you know, that's slow. Moving more to our left, we have the front torque gauge. So basically what this component does is tell you the torque split on a Skyline GTR. As I'm sure most of you know, these are all-wheel drive cars, but they have a rear drive bias. When the car senses slippage, it sends a percentage of torque up front, and this gauge will tell you anything up to 50%. The gauge is fairly reliable itself, and this isn't really one that people will oftentimes swap over an aftermarket one to because it's pretty unique to the Skyline. And last but not least, down here at the bottom, we have our fuel gauge. Now this one's actually pretty reliable, and looks like somehow this one has fuel in it right now, even though this thing is not in a car. But fuel gauge itself is pretty reliable. We've never really had to swap those. Again, like the speedometer, the biggest part is actually other components that fail it, namely the bobber that sits in the fuel tank connected to your fuel pump. It's a pretty easy fix to get that thing to work again, but maybe a little bit time consuming and messy as you'll have to deal with some fuel. Well, hey, we hope you enjoyed that physical, tangible part that we showed you instead of a photo on the internet. We made a special exception for you guys, and we hope you enjoyed it. If you're not already a subscriber, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can get more videos like this in the future. Thanks for watching this video, and have a good one.